Hello and welcome to Psychology School. I hope you all are safe and fine. So today we will discuss some other topics of personality. But before starting, in the previous video class, some sample questions were given related to the previous topic. So the answers of those questions are given here. You can take help from the given answers. Here all the 10 terms are defined. Well, moving on to our next topic, assessment of personality. So everybody is curious to know about his or her own personality or that of others. We meet new people in our day-to-day life. We often try to understand them and want to know about what type of personality or the personality traits they possess. Personality is so complex that it is hardly possible to make it an object for assessment and measurement. People always try to judge personality of other people, and it may be true or may not be true. So psychologists have made various efforts to know and for the assessment of the personality of individuals. So the formal effort and objective approach to measure personality was developed by psychologists, and this approach aimed at understanding personality of an individual, and therefore it is called personality assessment. Now you have already read about the term assessment in chapter 1 as well as in class 11. So assessment refers to the procedures used to evaluate or differentiate people on the basis of certain characteristics. Now the aim of assessment is to understand and predict behavior with minimum error and maximum accuracy. So in assessment, we try to study what a person generally does or how he or she behaves in a given situation. Assessment is useful for diagnosis, training, placement, counseling, and for other purposes. The most common used techniques or methods for the assessment of personality are broadly classified into psychometric tests, self-report measures, projective techniques, and behavioral analysis. So we will discuss about these techniques, and some psychometric tests were designed to measure intelligence. You have already read about this topic in chapter 1. So let's start with self-report measures. Self-report measures are the methods which gathers or collect information about person by asking her or him. They are fairly structured and they require subjects to give verbal responses using some kind of rating scales. They include various items and the subject has to respond to those items. The responses are accepted and they are scored in quantitative terms or scores and then interpreted on the basis of norms developed for the test. So some of the well-known self-report measures are MMPI, EPQ and 16PF. So we will discuss these tests in brief. Let's start with MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is also called MMPI, and it is a widely used test. It was developed by Hathaway and McKinley in 1943. This test was designed to assess personality characteristics indicative of psychological abnormality. The revised version of MMPI is MMPI-2, which came in 1989. MMPI consists of 567 statements or items for people to answer about themselves. They require answers in terms of true or false or cannot say. And these items are concerned with attitudes, emotions, motor disturbances, psychosomatic symptoms, and feelings and behaviors indicative of psychiatric problems. So this test is divided into 10 subscales which are aimed at diagnosing several psychological disorders such as depression, hysteria, schizophrenia, paranoia, and many other disorders which are given. Now the Indian adaptation of MMPI is JMPI, that is Jodhpur Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Moving on to the next self-report measure, that is EPQ or Eysenck Personality Questionnaire. It was developed by Eysenck and it is widely used test. Initially, test was designed to measure only two dimensions of personality, which are called introverted, extroverted, and emotionally stable and emotionally unstable. So these dimensions are characterized by 32 traits of personality. Later on, Eysenck developed a third dimension, which is psychoticism versus sociability. As you have already read about these three dimensions in Eysenck's theory of personality. So his test is based on these three dimensions. Psychoticism is related to psychopathology. People who are high on psychoticism tend to be independent thinkers, cold, non-conformist, impulsive, antisocial and hostile. Well, moving on to the next self-report measure, that is 16PF or 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire. Now this test was developed by Raymond Cattell. In developing 16PF, Raymond Cattell and his associates began with a list of over 4,500 adjectives applicable to human behavior and then reduced the list to 170. They used a statistical procedure called factor analysis to identify groupings or factors among the items. Then 16 factors were identified and Cattell considered these key characteristics or source traits of the human personality. As you have already read about these factors in Cattell's theory of personality. Now this test provides with declarative statements and the subject responds to a specific situation by choosing from a set of given alternatives. The test can be used with high school level students as well as with adults. It is very useful in career guidance, vocational exploration and occupational testing. Well, there are many other self-report techniques which assess specific dimensions of personality such as optimism, locus of control, etc. Now, the self-report measures suffer from a number of problems. They have various limitations. So, one of the main problems is social desirability, which means a tendency of the respondent or the subject to give responses of the items in a socially desirable manner. Or it means the person does not give real or true responses, rather he or she chooses to give responses according to social demands or which is socially sounds good and acceptable. Another problem is acquiescence, which is the tendency of the subject to agree with the items or questions irrespective of their contents. People generally give yes or no responses to most of the items. Now, one thing which is very important and should be kept in mind that personality assessment requires a great skill and training. A trained and expert person can only interpret personality in an accurate and reliable way. Then moving on to the next topic, projective techniques. So far we have discussed only those techniques which usually evaluate the overt or conscious behavior of an individual. Projective methods are based on the projective hypothesis, which is derived from Freud's personality theory, and it is a very interesting and useful method of personality assessment. The projective techniques not only emphasizes the observable part of the human personality, but can reveal the inner or private world and go deeper in the unconscious behavior to reveal the repressed feelings, wishes, desires, feelings, hopes, ambitions, etc. So they are developed to assess the unconscious motives and feelings. The basic idea is that the way people respond to a vague or ambiguous situation is often a projection of their underlying feelings and motives. So the subjects are provided with the unstructured stimuli, and it can be any picture, ink blot, incomplete sentences, etc. And the subject is asked to structure them or give meaning in any way he or she likes. The another important feature of projective test is that while giving responses, the people are not aware of any underlying meaning in their responses. So they cannot use any defensive reactions. So projective techniques assess personality in an indirect way and focuses on to assess personality as a whole. Now in projective techniques, the nature of stimuli and responses may vary, but they also have some similar features. The first feature is the stimuli are unstructured and vague. They are poorly defined. The another one is that the person being assessed is usually not told about the purpose of assessment and the method of scoring and interpretation. The person is informed that there are no correct or incorrect responses, and each response reveals an important aspect of personality. Their scoring and interpretation are very lengthy and subjective. So there are many differences between psychometric test and projective test. Firstly, in psychometric test, responses are objectively scored, but in projective test, responses are generally subjective. Secondly, psychometric test follows quantitative analysis, whereas projective techniques require qualitative analysis, and extensive training and expertise is required for the interpretation of the scores. Now, the common projective techniques are the Rorschach-Ink blot test, the Thematic Apperception test, Rosenzweig's picture frustration study, and sentence completion test, and the last is draw a person test. So let's discuss about the Rorschach-Ink blot test. Now, this test was developed by Swiss psychologist Hermann Rorschach, and this test consists of 10 cards with ink blots. Hermann Rorschach was the first person to use ink blots to study personality. Out of 10, 5 cards are black and white, 2 are with some red ink, and 3 cards are in pastel colors or they are multicolored. These ink blots are completely unstructured and they do not have any specific meaning. The ink blots are symmetrical in design with a specific shape and form, and each blot is printed in the center of a whiteboard of about 7 inches into 10 inches size. These unstructured stimuli or ink blots were generated by dropping ink into a card and folding it. Therefore, it is also known as ink blot test. This test has 2 phases. First phase is performance proper, in which subjects are shown the cards and they were asked to tell whatever they see in each of the cards. In the second phase, inquiry follows. It seeks clarification or addition of the original responses by asking the subject to tell where, how, and on what basis was a particular response was given. Then comes the interpretation and scoring of the responses, and this requires a great skill and lot of training on the part of the examiner. This should only be done by an experienced and trained psychologist. So you can see in this picture, it is an example of the Rorschach ink blot. This is one of the card out of 10. Well, let me remind you, if you want to attend next video class, you need to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. Then select all so that YouTube can send you notification for all upcoming video classes. So coming on to the next topic, the thematic apperception test. It was developed by Morgan and Murray in 1938, and TAT is based on Murray's theory of need. It was basically designed to figure out people's need, and it is more structured than Rorschach test. This test consists of perception of a certain picture in a thematic manner, means revealing imaginative themes. It consists of standard set of 30 pictures or cards which are in black and white and including one blank card. These cards portray pictures of human beings in a variety of actual life situations. 10 cards are used with males, 10 with females, and 10 for both. So 20 cards can be used for one subject at a time. Cards are presented one by one to the subject, and subject has to devote approximately 5 minutes to each of the cards, and the subject has to tell a story related to that picture. Following questions are asked, such as what's going on now in the picture, what thoughts and feelings the people in the story have, what events led up to the situation, and how it will turn out. So here is an example of TAT card showing the picture or drawing. While interpretation, it is assumed that subjects project their own needs, desires, and conflicts into the stories and characters. The other forms of TAT are also available, such as its Indian adaptation and children apperception test. Now let's discuss about the Rosenzweig's picture frustration study. Now this test was developed by Rosenzweig to assess how people express their aggression in frustrating situations. This test consists of cartoon-like pictures or a series of situations in which one person frustrates another person. The subject is asked to tell what the other person or the frustrated person will do or say. The responses are then interpreted on the basis of direction and type of aggression. So this test is also adapted in India. Next projective technique is Sentence completion test. These tests includes a list of incomplete open-ended sentences which require completion by the subject in one or more words. The ending of the sentences reflect the attitudes, motivation and conflicts of the subject. An example of the sentences is given here. Next projective test is draw a person test. As the name suggests, it requires to draw the picture of a person on a sheet of paper, and after completion of the drawing, the subject is asked to draw the figure of an opposite sex person. Subject is also asked to make a story about the person, and then finally comes to interpretations of the drawing. Next personality assessment method is behavioral analysis. Behavioral analysis includes the analysis of behavior of individuals for understanding the personality of individuals. Through observation of behavior, we can know a lot of things about one's personality. Many types of methods are used in personality assessment. Through behavioral analysis, some common methods are interview, observation, behavioral ratings, nominations, and situational tests. So, interview, you have already read about this term in previous class and previous chapter. It is a common method which involves simply asking questions to the person. They can be structured as well as unstructured. Unstructured interview involves asking a number of questions from the subject in order to develop an impression about the personality of the subject. Whereas structured interview involves asking very specific questions and has a set procedure. Another method is observation, which is also commonly used for the assessment of personality. Observation itself is a sophisticated procedure and it should be done with great expertise. It requires training and a fairly detailed guideline for observing and analysis of behaviors. There are some limitations of these methods, interview and observation, such as professional training or great skill is required. They are time consuming and quite demanding. Results can be influenced by mere presence of the observer, and sometimes observer as a stranger may influence the behavior of a person. So the next method is behavioral rating, which are frequently used in educational and industrial settings. Ratings are generally taken from the people who usually know the subject intimately and have interacted with her or him over a period of time. So they attempt to put individuals into certain categories in terms of their behavioral qualities. This method has various limitations. Firstly, people often rate on the basis of their own biases. So they overall view personality or give judgment on the basis of one favorable or unfavorable trait. So this is known as halo effect. And secondly, people place individuals either on the middle category or on extreme positions. Now, next method is nomination, which is often used in obtaining peer assessment. They are used with the persons who know personally each other very well. Then each one of them is asked to choose one or more persons of the group with whom he or she would like to work, study, play, or participate in any other activity. After receiving nominations, they are analyzed for understanding the personality. This technique is also affected by personal judgments or biases. The last method of personality assessment is situational test. Here the situation is artificially created in which an individual is expected to perform acts related to the personality traits under testing. So the most common situational test is situational stress test, which provides us the information about how a person behaves under stressful situations. The test also involves role playing, and verbal report is also obtained on what he or she was asked to do. Now here are some sample questions related to the topic personality assessment. Well, we have finished with the chapter 2 self and personality, and I hope you will find this worthwhile for your study. There were many interesting topics in the chapter. I hope you all have experienced a new feeling after knowing about personality. So don't forget to practice the sample questions of today's video class, and please tell me that which one was the best and interesting personality assessment method for you. So thank you so much. Stay home, stay safe and keep learning.